right. I think we're going to get started. I would like to welcome everybody. Good morning. Good morning to everybody. On behalf of the servants of the Holy Heart of Mary, I want to thank all of you for joining this morning's program. Faithful Citizenship, Voter Responsibility, and the Consistent Ethic of Life. Our speaker this morning is Stephen P. Millies. But before I introduce Steve, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Susan Amon. I'm the Director of Spiritual Ministry for the Servants of the Holy Heart of Mary. And let's start with a few Zoom housekeeping items before we...
Susan, right here.
The first one is I'm going to ask everybody to mute their microphone throughout the presentation. This is mostly a presentation today. Steve is going to be answering questions at the end of the presentation, so I'm going to ask everybody to please enter your questions in the chat feature. So if you're using a computer today, the chat feature, it's a little conversation bubble, is at the bottom of your screen.
See, notice they're all looking.
If you click on that, we'll open a window where you can enter your questions or your comments. If you're on a phone or a tablet, the chat bubble is at the top of the page, the top of your screen. Just click on that and open it up, and you can type.
We're only getting it from here. We're not getting it from the...
No, I'm not getting it.
We're not getting it from the...
I hear somebody. Who do I hear?
Look at our way.
The other thing that we're going to do is keep...
I'm going to leave, and we're going to come back.
It's Mary Kay Moran.
I can hear her.
Well, Susan, we don't have any sound, so I'm going to leave and come back.
Okay.
And see if I can get the sound.
Okay, perfect. And also, again, regarding your name, if your name on the screen near your picture doesn't say your name, if it says iPhone or some version of your phone number or your email, if you could change your name, you can do that by right-clicking on your name on the screen, and you should be able to change your name. That would just help with questions and answers at the end. Okay? One more bit of business about Zoom before we begin. We are running closed captioning. We're streaming closed captioning. So if closed captioning would help you to hear better or see better, you can turn the closed captioning on in your Zoom window. You should be able to find closed captioning again. If you're on a computer at the bottom of the screen, it's just a setting to turn on, or if you're on a tablet or a phone, it's at the top of the screen. This presentation is being recorded, so we'll be sharing it again probably in October as a recording. All right, so before I introduce our speaker, Sister Carol Karnitsky, the province leader for the Servants of the Holy Heart of Mary, is going to lead us in our opening prayer. I'm just going to share my window here. We are ready for you to begin anytime you're ready, Sister Carol.
I was gratified to see this particular picture and quote from our first president, George Washington, in 1789. It is the duty of all nations to acknowledge the providence of Almighty God, to obey His will, to be grateful for His benefits, and humbly to implore his protection and favors. And so with that in mind, we pray. O God, who arrange all things according to a wonderful design, graciously receive the prayers we pour out to you for our country, that through the wisdom of its leaders and the integrity of its citizens, harmony and justice may be assured, and lasting prosperity come with peace. Through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. And I welcome you all in the name of the servants of the Holy Heart of Mary.
Thank you, Sister Carol. Well, Stephen B. Millies is the director of the Bernardine Center and an associate professor of social theology, both at Catholic Theological Union. Steve trained as a political theorist at the Catholic University of America. His scholarship explores the Catholic Church's relationship to politics in a perspective that embraces history, theology, law, ethics, sociology, philosophy, and political theory. Steve's book, Joseph Bernardine, Seeking Common Ground, published by Liturgical Press, won first place in the biography category for the Catholic Press Association's 2017 Book Awards. His most recent book is Good Intentions, A History of Catholic Voters' Road from Road to Trump, also published by Liturgical Press. Steve is a Chicago native and currently lives in the Chicago area with his young family. Welcome, Steve.
Well, thank you very much, Carol, and thank you very much, Susan, and thank you very much, Sister Carol. Obviously, I needed another cup of coffee to get started this morning. It's a great delight in one sense to be with all of you this morning. Of course, naturally, I'm only standing just a stone's throw from my kitchen and coffee pot here at my home on the south side of Chicago. I had been really looking forward to coming to Kankakee and spending some time with all of you, and I hope very much we'll have the chance to be able to do that. I'm going to dive right in here in just a moment, but I want to pay a particular word of thanks to everyone who's tuned in and to the sisters for this invitation. I think for a variety of reasons, I've joked for many years as a political scientist that the biggest lie that's told in every election is that this is the most important election of our lifetimes. But I do think that at least on the horizon of the last few decades, it's hard to imagine an election where more is at stake for Catholic voters than there is this time. Not because of any issue, not because of any partisan affiliation, but because of the whole question of how we approach politics as Catholics. And that's very much the question that I want to try to get at over the next several minutes here. And so there seems to be no sense in doing anything other than just getting to it. And we'll begin by observing that the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops has been publishing its faithful citizenship documents every 4 years since the 1976 presidential election, the first election after the U.S. Supreme Court's Roe v. Wade decision. The present edition of Faithful Citizenship provoked some controversy last November when the bishops published it, and the reason was because it was the same edition as in the 2016 election. And substantively, it was the same as the Faithful Citizenship document issued for the 2012 election, and more or less the same as the one issued for the 2008 election. The document we have is an updated version of a document written in 2007, when George W. Bush was the president and Benedict XVI was the Pope. By itself, that was controversial. It seemed odd that the bishops wouldn't produce something new, considering how different our world is from the world of 2007, and especially considering the important role that Catholic voters have played in the advent of the Trump era. With families separated, children in cages, burgeoning racism, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia, and nationalist impulses seemingly indulged too often by too many Catholics, now would seem to be an opportune moment for our bishops to say something new and current about American politics. They did say something new. They published an introductory letter over the reissued 2016 edition of the 2007 Faithful Citizenship document. This also provided some opportunity for controversy because despite anything else happening in our world today, the bishops named abortion as their preeminent priority. In a world where, in the words of their own introductory letter, the challenges of migration, xenophobia, racism, global conflict, and care for creation all have become more pronounced. Despite all that, the now nearly 5-decade focus on abortion remains the document's signal characteristic. We hear it in the debate all around us. A Catholic cannot vote for Joe Biden because of abortion, or so we're told. And this is stranger still. Long ago, at least officially, the US bishops accepted Cardinal Joseph Bernardin's consistent ethic of life as the foundation of these faithful citizenship documents. Pope John Paul II incorporated the consistent ethic into the papal magisterium with 1995's Evangelium Vitae, where he wrote that, quote, "Where life is involved, the service of charity must be profoundly consistent. It cannot tolerate bias and discrimination, for human life is sacred and inviolable at every stage and in every situation. It is an indivisible good. We need then to show care for all life and for the life of everyone." Pope John Paul's meaning was unambiguous. Life is an indivisible good, and so every life, in every situation, makes an equal demand on our consistent attention. Without naming Cardinal Bernardin, Evangelium Vitae makes the argument of the consistent ethic of life. The consistent ethic was affirmed again by the US bishops in 1998 when they wrote in Living the Gospel of Life, quote, "Adopting a consistent ethic of life, the Catholic Church promotes a broad spectrum of issues seeking to protect human life and promote human dignity from the inception of life to its final moment. Opposition to abortion and euthanasia does not excuse indifference to those who suffer from poverty, violence, and injustice. Any politics of human life must work to resist the violence of war and the scandal of capital punishment. Any politics of human dignity must seriously address issues of racism, poverty, hunger, unemployment, education, housing, and healthcare. Therefore, Catholics should eagerly involve themselves as advocates for the weak and marginalized in all these areas. Catholic public officials are obliged to address each of these issues as they seek to build consistent policies which promote respect for the human person at all stages of life." So there can be no mistaking that the consistent ethic is the accepted teaching of the Church, both because of these documents and because of what the Associate General Secretary of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops wrote to me in 2016, quote, "The consistent ethic of life approach has been present and actively advanced all along." It's difficult from all this to see where the preeminence of abortion comes from. If we're fair, reading the Faithful Citizenship document, it's difficult to argue the consistent ethic is not actively advanced. It's there in the document, everywhere. Yet somehow the preeminence of abortion succeeds over and over to make us a single issue church in election year after election year. And that's where we want to take our beginning. We must unravel this conundrum. Why do we still remain a single issue church despite the authority of the consistent ethic? Which in turn will lead us into a deeper reflection on how we're to live our faithful citizenship and the challenges that the practical world sets in front of us. And finally, we'll turn to Pope Francis for some guidance about how we can find a new way to approach these perennial problems. But let's begin with the faithful citizenship document itself. The PDF version on the bishop's website runs to 53 pages, about 15,000 words in length, or the length of the book of Job. While these documents have been the US bishop's most public and purposeful effort for forming consciences for faithful citizenship over the last nearly 5 decades, I'd be willing to bet that fewer than 10% of American Catholics ever have read one. I think this is an important point. The average American, according to the Pew Research Center, reads 12 books a year. But that average includes both the most voracious readers you know and the people who never read a word. And if you know any voracious readers, dragging the average down to a book a month means non-readers heavily outnumber readers. For the first time this year, the bishops have added a 2-minute supplemental video to the faithful citizenship document. But 2 minutes hardly scratches the surface of the complexity we're facing, and the video doesn't really deal with issues at all beyond mentioning them. So in the first place, we have to deal with a fundamental problem the bishops face when they want to form consciences for citizenship. There is an incredible complexity that will be absent if they don't treat it. And if they do address the complexity in print, very few people are going to read it. But addressing that complexity in print is not all that much easier or more effective. To illustrate that point, let's take some excerpts from Faithful Citizenship. Begin with paragraph 55. Quote, "These 4 principles, the dignity of the human person, subsidiarity, the common good, solidarity, and related themes from Catholic social teaching provide a moral framework that does not easily fit ideologies of right or left, liberal or conservative, or the platform of any political party. They're not partisan or sectarian, but reflect fundamental ethical principles common to all people." True enough. Now try paragraph 60. "We can't compromise basic principles or moral teaching. We are committed to clarity about our moral teaching and to civility. In public life, it is important to practice the virtues of charity and justice that are the core of our tradition. We should work with others in a variety of ways to advance our moral principles." Now we've abandoned, suddenly, frustrating the easy choice between left and right, and there's a clear moral choice we have to make. But let's go on and compare paragraph 7, which says, "We bishops do not intend to tell Catholics for whom or against whom to vote." Compare that with paragraph 30, which quotes from the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith as saying, "A well-formed Christian conscience does not permit one to vote for a political program or individual law that contradicts the fundamental contents of faith and morals." I'm saying there's little wonder why people give up and give in to the familiar and frankly easier left-right construction of American politics, giving weight to partisan preferences instead of engaging in the rather challenging moral exercise called for in faithful citizenship. The Catholic faith is neither left nor right, and we are only called to practice justice and charity when we choose between Republicans and Democrats. The bishops don't want to tell anyone how to vote, but no one may vote for something both political parties do, contradict the fundamental contents of faith and morals. Facing this baffling set of almost contradictory instructions, too often for too many Catholics and Catholic bishops, the answer has been simply to identify one issue as a preeminent priority and cut through the confusion by focusing squarely on something simpler. The very worst example of this I can imagine came to us from our neighbor here in Illinois, Bishop Thomas Paprocki from downstate Springfield, who told his flock in 2012 that, quote, "My job is not to tell you for whom you should vote, but I do have a duty to speak out on moral issues. People of faith object to these democratic platform positions that promote serious sins. So what about the Republicans?" he goes on to say. "I have read the Republican platform, and there is nothing in it that supports or promotes an intrinsic evil or serious sin." I want to come to the particulars of the party platforms in a moment, and we need to examine those claims to bring our conversation forward. But let's deal with these categories first: intrinsic evil and serious sin. I'd want to point everyone to a very good treatment Boston College professor Kathleen Caveney gave to this sort of moral analysis back in 2008 in America Magazine. Professor Caveney gave definitions to these terms that can help us. Intrinsic evil is an act that never can be justified. So intrinsic evil certainly includes abortion. Intrinsic evil also includes racism, which never can be justified. But much less serious sins also are intrinsically evil. Slander never can have a justification, in the same way that theft or even killing sometimes can have justifications. Stealing can feed a hungry person, and killing can save an innocent life. Both are serious sins, but both can be justified in the presence of serious reasons. An intrinsically evil act like slandering someone's good reputation can't ever be justified. What other good ever can be achieved by destroying someone's reputation? Pope Francis recently said gossip is a greater plague than COVID-19, and gossip certainly is as virulent and as persistent as a deadly disease. Pope Francis says this to tell us that gossip also is intrinsically evil. Gossip never does anyone any good, yet neither gossip nor slander is a serious sin. For that reason, we need to say, intrinsic evil is not the same as serious sin. And in some cases, a sin is not very serious at all, even if it is an intrinsic evil. Professor Caveney draws this argument directly from John Paul II and St. Thomas Aquinas, I should say, and she goes on to some rather interesting places. She observed that preventing intrinsically evil acts is not always our top moral priority. For example, which presents the greater moral demand? Seeking a public policy solution to a pandemic that would spare thousands of lives, or preventing two LGBT people from marrying one another? The Church teaches that the marriage of two men or two women is intrinsically evil, and certainly that's true. A plague is not an intrinsic evil at all because no person commits the act. It's categorized as a natural evil. However, the moral duty to prevent harm to others must override other goods. No one will die from a same-sex marriage. And so an intrinsic evil is not always our greatest moral concern. This is where we come to the 2012 party platforms Bishop Paprocki examined. It's true that abortion combines intrinsic evil and serious sin. Or to correct Bishop Paprocki slightly, the category is actually grave sin. But we also can see that intrinsic evils don't automatically claim our most urgent moral attention only because they're intrinsic. Even grave sins, such as lying, or fraud, or failure to love, do not necessarily make the most urgent claim on us, because for as categorically grave as the sin is, there is no possibility of mortal danger. That's why, when we look back to the 2012 Republican platform through the lens of Professor Caveney's analysis, we can notice some interesting things that Bishop Paprocki overlooked when he read the Republican platform in 2012. The Republican platform called for an all-of-the-above energy strategy that included extending the Keystone Pipeline, opening the outer continental shelf for energy exploration and development, and opening the coastal plain of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge for exploration and production of oil and natural gas, transforming ecosystems and natural beauties that never can be replaced in order to consume more fossil fuels whose use threatens all life on Earth. Which makes the greater moral claim on our moral attention? The marriage of two men or two women, or the permanent loss of an ecosystem and the rising sea levels that threaten human life? The Republican platform in 2012 also tells us that our country and its way of life have enemies, both abroad and within our shores. We affirm the need for our military to protect the nation by finding and capturing our enemies, and the necessity for the president to have the tools to deal with these threats. What that refers to, in not so many words, but what it means, is a military policy that's caused thousands of civilian deaths in Afghanistan and Iraq only at the time when this platform was published, and even more since. The implications of a foreign policy that would lead to ongoing innocent civilian casualties, where at least certainly in Iraq, there can be no claiming the rigorous demands for justification in warfare were satisfied, that must take at least make as great a claim on our moral attention as abortion. After all, civilian deaths are the deaths of innocents, like abortions. And if that's not persuasive enough, recall that statistically, 3% of the population is pregnant at any time. And certainly, that will include civilian victims of US drone strikes. I offer these thoughts because it's necessary to bring some moral complexity to the rather simple story we're told very often about how we should be voting. I'm aware of few moral theologians who are making arguments like the one I've made. I named one, Kathleen Caveney, and there are others. But I've never heard a Catholic bishop say things like this, nor have I ever heard a homily preached like this. And I doubt many of you have either. And this is why I think we need to do some work to unravel the reasons why abortion so much dominates our thinking. Outside some very rarefied academic precincts, Catholics are unlikely to hear about the moral complexity of what they're doing when they vote. I have heard one Catholic bishop talk about that complexity, and of course, that was Cardinal Bernardin. The consistent ethic of life was his effort to draw that complexity into our popular conversation, into the discussions that we have in our pews and over our dinner tables. But we know today that while Cardinal Bernardin did succeed to make the consistent ethic of life a part of official church teaching, he was less successful, bringing the consistent ethic of life into the imaginations of most Catholics or even most bishops. And I want to suggest there were three important reasons why he was unsuccessful. The first reason is that the damage was already done by the time he introduced the consistent ethic in 1983. Our debate already was poisoned by a growing political preoccupation with abortion. When it was handed down by the Supreme Court in 1973, in retrospect, Roe attracted what seems like very little attention. It wasn't mentioned during a presidential press conference 8 days after the decision was announced, and neither did it come up the morning after that press conference, 9 days after the decision was announced, when President Nixon spoke at the National Prayer Breakfast. The controversy only began to explode during the first presidential election after Roe in 1976, when then Archbishop Joseph Bernardin led the executive committee of the Bishops' Conference in meetings with Jimmy Carter and Gerald Ford, the Democratic and Republican nominees for president. Carter declined to support a constitutional amendment that would reverse Roe, and Archbishop Bernardin told the waiting reporters that the bishops were disappointed by their meeting with Governor Carter. Sensing opportunity, President Ford called the bishops in and gave them his support for a human life amendment. Archbishop Bernardin told the waiting press that the bishops had been encouraged by their meeting with Ford, and the die was cast. Abortion became an idée fixe among Catholics and especially among Catholic leaders. Their political commitment to abortion became overriding. By the time Bernardin came along with a consistent ethic in 1983, it simply was too late. The division between Democrats and Republicans and the Catholic commitment to that division simply had gotten too deep. It would get deeper, of course, but the consistent ethic was defeated by controversy almost as quickly as it was introduced. And this relates to the second reason why Bernardin was unsuccessful. Church historians in the United States talk about the differences between Jadot bishops and Lagi bishops. The difference refers to the different sorts of bishops named to the United States when Archbishop Jean Jadot was the apostolic delegate and later when Archbishop Pio Laghi was the delegate. The apostolic delegate was not only the Holy See's diplomatic representative to the United States, he also played a role in the selection of bishops. Jadot was Paul VI's final delegate, and Pope John Paul II inherited him in 1978 when he was elected. In 1980, John Paul named Pio Laghi as the apostolic delegate, and there was a difference in the men who were named bishops that became more noticeable as the 1980s drew on. Jadot was a man of the Second Vatican Council and the enthusiastic first years after it ended. The bishops brought forth by Jadot tended to be men who wanted to engage the world, reach out to the world, embrace the world. The Laghi bishops tended to reflect a different sort of emphasis, one derived from the next wave in the reception of Vatican II. Laghi bishops tended to be preoccupied by the encroachments of secularism and the loss of the church's status in social and cultural life. Where Jadot bishops embraced the world, Laghi bishops tended to be men who wanted to confront a secular world for its tolerance of, among other things, abortion. No one really knew it yet in 1983 when Cardinal Bernardin introduced the consistent ethic, but the tone already had changed. Rome was beginning to take a more directly confrontational line with the world outside the church, and the confrontation requires the drawing of lines. Abortion was the clearest line that could be drawn, and becoming distracted by other issues such as nuclear war or poverty or capital punishment tended to distract from the confrontation. But finally, in this environment where confrontation was the goal, complexity had to be a casualty. Confrontation is simple. We oppose you. Complexity defies a simple binary like that. Complexity demands subtlety, and very rarely is there room for subtlety in political arguments. The fact that Catholics had become enmeshed in a political argument about abortion meant that there was no place for the complexity of moral argument to fit in. The complexity that the consistent ethic of life must put at the center of attention finally was the third reason the consistent ethic of life was dead on arrival. And for that reason, all of the US bishops' faithful citizenship efforts tend to boil down simply and merely only to abortion. We've been hearing a simple message for a long time, and more recently, that simple message has been repeated by Catherine P. O'Neill, the head of Catholics for Trump, and more controversially by La Crosse, Wisconsin priest Father James Altman. The simple message is, you can't be a Catholic and be a Democrat. Interestingly, the head of Catholics for Trump and Father Altman both used precisely the same phrasing. But here is where some simplicity perhaps might begin to help us. If we want to reflect on how to live our faithful citizenship as Catholic citizens, maybe Father Altman and Ms. O'Neill are prompting us to ask the right question. What is a Catholic? Speaking as a political scientist, I can say defining a Democrat is easy. A Democrat is anyone who runs for office as a Democrat, anyone who holds office as a Democrat, and anyone in the moment when they vote for a Democratic candidate. Democrat isn't an ontological status. It's not something imprinted on us like sacramental grace. It's something that political science teaches us we put on in situations. For most of us, we are only a member of a party in the act of voting for the party. Even in that act, we know that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Hillary Rodham Clinton are different sorts of Democrats, and they believe different things. There is considerable diversity among Democrats. Being Catholic is an ontological mark imprinted on us by our baptism, and in this sense, being Catholic is quite different. But perhaps it's worth recalling that Catholics also are permitted to believe a wide diversity of different things. Let's begin by remembering something most Catholics never think about. There are many different liturgical calendars and different liturgical rites in our church, because the Roman rite is only one of 23 rites in communion with the papacy. The Syro-Malabar Rite or the Syriac Rite would be unrecognizable to most Catholics we know, and yet the members of those Eastern churches undeniably are as Catholic as the Pope. But there is a deeper and at least equally unfamiliar sense in which I want to make being Catholic seem very, very simple, and it is this. There are very few things as Catholics that we are definitively required to believe. What Catholics must accept without question is contained in the dogmas of the Church and summarized more or less by the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed, or the promises made at baptism and renewed during the Easter season. We believe in the three persons of the Trinity. We believe in the incarnation, crucifixion, and resurrection of Jesus, the virginity of Mary, the resurrection of the body, the Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, and life everlasting. Amen. This is our faith. This is the faith of the Church, and we are proud to proclaim it. Father James Martin and others had pointed out, saying someone's not a Catholic because of some political position overlooks entirely these most central elements of Catholic faith and treats them almost like they're irrelevant. And that's strange. To be Catholic also is to owe religious submission of mind and will to the doctrines of the Church. But without getting too technical about it here, where I'm only making a point about how simple it really is to be a Catholic, I only want to observe that the doctrines of the Church have a range of authorities. Some are more definitive than others. And of course, we know that doctrine develops. And as doctrine can develop, that means there can be some legitimate room for disagreement, even about doctrine. That's an inevitable, necessary corollary of doctrinal development. For example, if I survey the long history of the Church through 20 centuries, and that experience leaves me wondering whether really the Church only can ordain unmarried men, having that question does not remove the mark of my baptism. In fact, I haven't even committed a sin when I do that. Now, coming to understand how simple it is really to be a Catholic certainly demands that we need to step away from the tumult of political argument and think for a moment. When we come to a clearer understanding of our faith, we see that we Americans have adopted a rather strange way of understanding what being a Catholic means. Most of us, when we think about being a Catholic, we think of it like the loyalty I feel toward the Chicago White Sox, or the loyalty I am meant to feel toward brands like Cheerios, Charmin, or Cheez-Its, than it is like the rather simple and profound attachment to the gospel and the person of Jesus. But if it's some sort of help that we're searching for when we embark on the task of bringing our faith to bear as citizens, I want to suggest that this simple and profound attachment is what it means to be a Catholic in political life, because it's what it means to be a Catholic. We respond in love to the world, and especially to the vulnerable. Now that does seem simple, and of course it's not simple. Politics is about making imperfect choices between imperfect alternatives. We all know from experience that we never are given simple choices between good and evil. And we know that sometimes we need to weigh the care we can show to one group of vulnerable people against the care we can show to another group of vulnerable people, because for any of a variety of reasons, our available choices don't permit us to help everyone. Sometimes it's the inadequacy of resources, money, or time. Sometimes it's because the reach of our action doesn't stretch far enough to help everyone. Sometimes it's because we have two major political parties, each of which only reflects partially the care for the vulnerable we want to express. So how shall we vote? I want to dwell for a moment here on the nature of what politics is, and ultimately to do that in the light of what Pope Francis has been saying rather consistently about politics since his election. Here is an important thought from Pope Francis to help get us started. Quote, "We have politicians and even religious leaders who wonder why people do not understand and follow them, since their proposals are so clear and logical. Perhaps it's because they are stuck in the realm of pure ideas and end up reducing politics or faith to rhetoric. There is a lot of truth in those two sentences for us to notice and appreciate. First, notice Francis hasn't hesitated to group politicians and religious leaders together, and by religious leaders, he certainly must mean to include Catholic bishops. Pope Francis sees that religious leaders and politicians are behaving the same way a little too often, and he doesn't appear to be impressed by how they're behaving. They offer such clear and logical ideas as though everything's been figured out. There's no work for us to do. Just listen and do as told. Isn't it simple that way? But in particular, I want to call attention to how Francis pays preferential attention to what is concrete, not to what is abstract. As he said elsewhere, realities are more important than ideas. And that's an important political idea. Politics is concrete. Politics is practical. It demands practical wisdom, and it poses us with practical decisions, like those we face when we vote or otherwise participate in political life. Our political decisions always are concrete. We make them in moments when some things are possible and other things are not. Over time, what's possible changes. Opportunities come, then they pass. Circumstances and contexts shift. And in each moment, we need to be asking, what is the most effective good I can do now, today, reading the signs of these times? And of course, we have to guess. We have imperfect knowledge about the future and even the present. We don't know what the effects of our actions will be. We do our best to anticipate and draw from our experience and what knowledge we do have, but everyone who has voted so far to end abortions has been wrong. So has everyone who has voted to end war or poverty. Political decision-making doesn't work like that. That's why Cardinal Bernardine's consistent ethic of life is important. We often hear it said the consistent ethic blurred the distinctions between different threats to human life, somehow diminishing the seriousness of abortion. But what Bernardine said was that we need to cultivate an attitude that always puts protecting human life first. And with that as the center of our concern, then we need to ask how in this moment we can most effectively protect human life. Which candidate or party stands the chance to do the most good in these circumstances? The candidate or party that seems best may change from election to election because perhaps at one time something concrete might really be done to reduce the number of abortions, while in a later election circumstances may say the chances are better to do something concrete that will reduce poverty. Perhaps you might calculate that focusing your attention on alleviating poverty might not only help the poor, but also might reduce abortions. Perhaps you've decided that the President of the United States really can't abortions much at all, but he might take effective steps to end a pandemic. And these are just a few examples. Notice that all of these judgments begin from the same place, from a desire to promote and protect human life effectively. Notice that all of them proceed from the desire to weigh the possibilities of the moment and calculate the best way to act based on a reflection on the concrete details of what the law says, or how the branches of government operate, or on what particular candidates say, or on how candidates are constrained by political considerations, or whether economic considerations might frustrate particular sorts of actions at a given time, or any of other countless concrete details. Simply to say that something is morally evil, so you have to vote against it, is, as Pope Francis said, stuck in the realm of pure ideas. And as Pope Francis says, that reduces politics or faith to rhetoric. It becomes angry noise that distracts us from being effective, believing citizens in any meaningful sense. It's bad political advice, and worse, Because rhetoric like that excuses us from the difficult moral reflection we are supposed to be doing as citizens, we actually fail to do any practical good. We dream of ending a moral evil for 5 decades. After 11 presidential elections have failed to end it, we still act as though the 12th election will. And what good do we fail to do while we abandon concrete action for abstract rhetoric? How divided do we become? How much toxicity do we welcome into the atmosphere of our community in exchange for the fleeting pleasure of feeling like we are more right than someone else? How much do we let such rhetoric lull us into what Francis has called a semi-Pelagian mindset? The belief that we are in charge, and as the President of the United States even has said out loud recently, God somehow needs our help to bring salvation to the world by defeating someone in an election. What I like about the Faithful Citizenship document is that it will not tell us how to vote. And it does take seriously the full range of threats to human life. Yet we never fail to fall into the abortion trap. And we have to stop doing that. We just have to. And the best way to do that is to take Pope Francis's advice. We have to notice that everything we've been doing hasn't worked. Not only have we failed to get the policy outcomes we say we want, but we've also managed to marginalize the Catholic voice everywhere in politics. Appearing as partisan as any politician, religious leaders have made themselves very little different from politicians. And even their good arguments, it seems to me, are greeted with wary cynicism. And that's not where the Catholic voice should be. To think concretely rather than abstractly means we have to be educated about the issues, educated about the political system, and educated about the possibilities of this particular moment. It also means we have to be willing to risk getting it wrong. Perhaps we'll miscalculate, and our vote won't yield the good result we hoped it would. But that's okay. Elections almost never settle things, and the next time we'll get a chance to do it again. The political system always is in an ongoing process of reinventing itself. Old problems disappear, new problems emerge, sometimes new opportunities surprise us. The whole moral universe does not collapse because of one election or one vote. Listen to Pope Francis one last time. Last January, he told a group of American bishops on their ad limina visit to Rome, in an election, you sometimes seem to be caught, You're going to vote in one sense for a snake, or you're going to vote for a dragon. The Pope's advice to the bishops was to teach your people discernment by stepping back from the sheer politics of it and focusing on the values at stake. If you try to step back and say, but here are the major moral issues that we face, that's what's most important. That word, discernment, is where I want to end. It's a Jesuit word drawn from Ignatian spirituality, and it means to suggest to us, excuse me, and it means to suggest to us that we need to sit with problems, search for wisdom and guidance, and so carefully come to understand what comes from God and what doesn't, what's good and what isn't. The assumption is that discernment is not about finding what's already obvious. Discernment is about sifting through a problem and listening for the whisper of a still small voice. Notice what Pope Francis didn't talk about. He didn't name any issues. He didn't provide a clear roadmap, no voter's guide or ready-made answer that tells you which candidate or party is the one that makes you a Catholic. No preeminent priority. Excuse me. Excuse me. Instead, observe the signs of the times, Pope Francis tells us. Listen, learn, reflect, and discern. That's the antidote. It's the way we stop falling into the trap of single-issue voting, and we escape from this abortion trap that we're in. It also escapes the temptation that has ensnared every iteration of faithful citizenship we ever have seen. All of them fall into this very Catholic, in fact, comically Catholic pattern of issuing a long document with numbered paragraphs that turns what we believe into a homework assignment nobody wants to do. When did Jesus ever distribute a syllabus? But we do love our documents. The virtue we find in this much simpler way Pope Francis suggests, thinking concretely and discerning carefully with humility, is that it is finally not an intellectual exercise. Francis challenges us to do something else entirely, to deepen our love for God and one another, and then to respond and to act from that. And anyone can do it. It doesn't require advanced study of theology or philosophy, nor is it a grade on a test about the catechism. Our political activity must simply be spiritual activity. It must grow from our hopefully growing spiritual lives. And so we must nourish our spiritual lives in order to be faithful citizens. The Catholic way to vote is to be good Catholics. And that has nothing to do with party affiliation or any public policy outcome. As a spiritual matter, we should trust St. John of the Cross. In the evening of life, we'll be judged on love alone. I like to put it this way, though. A good Catholic can vote for Donald Trump. A good Catholic can vote for Joe Biden. The vote doesn't tell me much, but tell me why you voted for one or the other. How much have you thought about the implications of your vote? How concerned are you for promoting and protecting every human life in every situation in concretely effective ways, not sacrificing your vote to an abstraction that helps no one? How committed are you to overcoming division and building up this world we have been given? When you are judged on love alone, what will your vote say about you? One day, we all will be asked those questions, and we'd better have good answers. And thank you very much for paying attention on a Saturday morning.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you so much. At this point, Steve agreed to take some questions. I don't really have very many questions in the chat.
It's a good feeling if all the questions are answered.
I'm sure it's a good feeling for you as a instructor, as a teacher. So maybe I'm going to take the chance of, I know there's not everybody's got their video on, but if you have a question and you want to raise your hand, I will look through our video and see if somebody has their hand raised. One of our participants here asked, or has said, this has been an excellent presentation and it would be wonderful it could be somehow widely disseminated. So there you go, pat. Do you have plans to share this with the bishops individually or collectively?
Oh, I assure you they haven't asked me for any help.
Too bad.
No, we are doing some things through the Bernardine Center. This is a key moment for us that we've been building toward for 3 years, because the challenge, of course, is not just to keep Cardinal Bernardine's flame alive, because we're coming up very closely on 25 years since he left us. The question is, what do these things that he left us in the development of the Second Vatican Council and what it means to be Catholic in a 20th and 21st century? What do these things mean for us now as we're really entering a fundamentally different era? We'll certainly be doing a lot of public programming. I've got 2 more public programs coming up this week alone from here in the home studio. But we've got some other stuff coming. The most important thing really, I think, comes down to this. I don't know how this election is going to turn out. I really don't. But I do know on the other side of it, no matter how it turns out, I really do think the last 50 years of how we've done politics as Catholics in the United States is going to be over. I think we're starting to see this fascinating, if you haven't followed this business about this guy up in La Crosse, Wisconsin, Father Altman, who said you can't be a Catholic and a Democrat. And really, it's a startling 10-minute video that he released last week. It was very quickly picked up and endorsed by the Bishop of Tyler, Texas. But this priest has now been told by his own bishop in La Crosse that he's facing imminent canonical penalties if he doesn't knock it off. And what's sort of fascinating about it is this conflict between two Catholic bishops about this. It's suggestive to me that very slowly they're waking up to the fact that they've unleashed something here in the Catholic community and in the American social and political community that needs to be gotten control of. And I don't think that means diminishing our witness on abortion or poverty or anything else. What I'm trying to say most fundamentally is that we really have to be far more cautious about how we do this and not to become so captive as I think we have become to this sense of division and polarization. So, you know, I thump this drum every time I can in public places. When the bishops call, I will certainly pick up the phone.
Very good, very good. Did anybody else have a question for Steve?
I saw something popped up in the chat while I was talking, but it's gone away and I couldn't read it because I was too busy listening to myself.
Well, you can scroll your chat. One of the comments is, I agree with the above entirely. This basic of conscious formation, what it is, a Catholic, Republican, Democrat, is so essential and all presented with such respect and positivity. So that's feedback for you, Steve.
Well, then you're just the people I wanted to talk to.
Daniel, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
I think I am unmuted.
Very good.
Well, it's okay. So I asked the question about sharing with the bishops, but if they're not going to ask for it, is there any other groups or individuals that would be effective that this could be shared with?
Well, first of all, let me say we do have something in planning right now that I don't want to talk about yet.
Okay.
But I'll say this much, that it struck me 2 weeks ago that like a program like this gives us an opportunity maybe to have a different reach than if everyone had to come to Kankakee. COVID presents a strange opportunity as we head down toward Election Day, which is that very few Catholics, I think, will have that experience they've had before too many elections of hearing an angry, you must vote this way on abortion homily on the Sunday or 2 Sundays before Election Day. So we have formed a plan, not yet complete, to fill that space with some online videos and some programming that does try to convey this message that there's a greater complexity that needs to be picked up. But I'm not too confident, I have to say, about our ability to do too much to move the needle before November 3rd of this year. There's just not enough time to get enough Catholics thinking differently yet. But I do think there's going to be a very hot iron in need of striking after Election Day. I sense a tremendous amount of growing frustration among Catholics on both sides of this divide. And I think, as I've said, this is nearing a breaking point. My main focus is on being ready for that.
Thank you.
That's very interesting. Sister Charlene, did you have a question?
There's one here that's just popped up from Mary in the chat as well, but I'll take anybody.
It's Sister Karen.
Oh, Sister Karen.
I was going to ask a question in the chat, but then Steve answered it about the comments from the priest in Wisconsin and the bishop in Texas. Comment though regarding the abortion issue, I think that over the past 50 years, we have seen a decline in abortions, maybe not as much as we would like to, but definitely a decline. And so for people to dwell just on the abortion issue negates our obligation to those people who are at the borders and can't get it, or be allowed to apply for amnesty or protection, and all the racism that's going on in the country. And where do we draw a line and say enough is enough?
Yeah, I think that that's a very important point, and it opens up a number of avenues I'll just gesture toward very briefly. One of them is, when I was in high school 3 decades ago, the number of abortions in the United States per year was exactly double what it is now. So it's been cut in half in 30 years. The why is very interesting. The why, I think, has somewhat to do with some social safety net programs, although they've been cut rather more than they've been helped for the last 30 years, really. I think there is a rapidly changing bioethical, medical, and legal landscape around abortion that our angry argument about it has not noticed. It was the most important thing that I took away from Sister Deidre Burns' remarks at the Republican National Convention. I think the Little Sisters of the Poor are great, but I can't understand why a medical doctor like Sister Deidre doesn't know that 41% of those abortions that still take place, that are still counted among the 862,000 per year, 41% of them are by means of mifepristone. They're pharmaceutically induced abortions. They're essentially medically induced miscarriages. And the bioethical issues are different, and the legal issues are different. And the one thing that Sister Deidre did name, late-term abortions, abortions after the 21st week, that is 1.3% of abortions. It is a vanishingly small problem. And yet at the same time, you name racism, you name the terrible crisis at the border. And I want to say too, yesterday on the 19th anniversary of the September 11th attacks, we reached a milestone that we have lost 65 times as many people to COVID-19 as we lost on September 11th, 2001. I want to say that again, 65 times as many people. It's an extraordinary fact. And we know now too, we can look around the world and see how unnecessary it has been. I want to give you one more statistic. In the last 4 months, more death certificates have been issued in the United States of America than in any other 4-month period in American history. If that's not a life issue, that something concretely can be done about right now, just by good public health, public policy, like virtually every other nation in the world has done, we could begin to arrest this in a matter of weeks. It just requires the determination to do it. And for Catholics, I think it demands seeing all of these things as life issues that are at least equal to abortion. And that's why that language of preeminent priority, I find extremely unhelpful. It only feeds something terrible, and it doesn't stop abortions.
There's been a couple more comments in the chat here, Steve.
I'll say too, Sister Carol has had her hand up, but we can take them in any order.
Go ahead, Sister Carol.
Just a couple of things that I'd like to reflect on. I was thinking about the universal prayers we have at Mass. Often we say that life may be protected from conception to natural death, but we never say that life be protected from natural conception to natural death. We don't approach the idea of in vitro. We don't approach the idea of surrogacy. And that's never really touched, which is also a very profound moral issue. And then secondarily, something that may be of help to anybody who is viewing here. Network has, you've probably heard of Nuns on a Bus. Well, they have Nuns on a Virtual Bus, and it will be starting September 23rd with presentations, town halls, things like that. And one of the most prevalent ideas is multi-issue voting. So if you want some more fodder, if you want some more information, please consider Nuns on a Bus.
Yeah, I only can endorse that. Network's a wonderful organization.
David's got his hand up.
I'm going to take the comment from, I think it's Mary. Could a pro-choice platform lead to less abortion, or more pro-life presidency lead to more abortion?
Well, that's what gets us into the level of concrete details, right? What public policy outcomes follow public policy choices? Those are difficult things to get a handle on. Researchers try. Causes and effects are very difficult to pin down because, of course, they're done individually by people mostly in crisis situations, and they're not things that they're eager to talk about. But as a general rule, we know that abortion rates tend to go down during Democratic administrations and tend to go up during Republican administrations. And that probably does have something to do with the availability of options to pay for prenatal care, to offer opportunities to feed and clothe a child if you're in an economically challenged situation. The most pro-life thing, one of the things I always like to say about this is there's been no moment in human history that there hasn't been abortion. So the idea that we should set eliminating or ending abortion as our goal is self-defeating. What we really ought to be doing, for as little, if you were to get to know me, I'm not much of a fan of Bill Clinton for all kinds of reasons. But I do think it's very difficult to improve on safe, legal, and rare as a good goal. Because we know that the American people, 90%, don't want the law to change, according to some polls. And at least on the pro-life, pro-choice question, which is a different question from the law, on the pro-life, pro-choice question, we know that public opinion, for this long argument we've had about it for 50 years, public opinion has been remarkably stable for a very long time. So because this is a representative government that has to reflect the people, all of whom are not Catholic, we're always going to be faced with a natural political and legal limit that we can hope for. In my opinion, the moment when Hillary Clinton lost the 2016 election was in a debate when she said that she wanted abortion to be safe and legal and omitted the word rare. I think rare is important, but rare depends on providing real alternatives for women. Rare depends on having real choices, not just the choice to have an abortion or not to have an abortion, but the choice that you can really have this child, maybe to have the child for adoption and you can have access to prenatal care. Maybe you can imagine a world in which you could raise the child because you have real choices because of public policy options that have been put in front of you. And that seems to me like that's a far better object for our political concern on this issue. But again, that's just my opinion. Others can disagree. That's actually the main point I'm trying to get across.
Thanks, Steve. Carol asks, would you be willing to share your wisdom on relevant radio? And Mike, I'll add to that. Have you ever?
No, I haven't. I'm doing a podcast interview on Monday with Sister Julia Walsh, her Messy Jesus Business podcast. I've done some radio stuff. I don't think I've been on relevant radio before. But no, I say yes to, ask my wife, I say yes to almost everything. Except around the house.
Oh, Daniel had another question or comment. Catholic university students could benefit from viewing this talk. It's informative. I know that you work with graduate students. Is there or have there been forums on these topics in election years at CTU, and I know you're working with Loyola this year too.
Yeah, this is my first election year at CTU. I only really got here in 2017. I will say, I am doing programming and teaching at Loyola also this fall semester because I say yes to everything. But we are going to be having a program with EJ Dion and with Emma Green and with me on a panel. Emma Green's from the Atlantic, and with me on a panel talking on Thursday. And you can find out about that on the CTU webpage. There will be other things as well. The Loyola class that I'm teaching, I want to say 2 words about Catholic University students. I'm teaching 17 Loyola undergraduates this semester. The course is Catholicism and Political Engagement, and it is 14 weeks of what we've done here this morning. And I want to say 2 things about that. The first is that it's been extraordinary. We've had 3 class meetings now, and they are very involved. I worried a lot about getting a good discussion going on Zoom like this. I haven't had to do much work at all. They have really taken it up and run with it. But the thing I really want to say is that almost to a person, they, like a lot of people in their age group, identify as having been raised Catholic, period. Almost with the past tense. And being honest, I think that's among the detrimental effects of this thing I've been talking about this morning. The wary cynicism when the church speaks in public, the confusion of religious leaders and politicians, and this young generation that knows one thing better than they know anything else. They've been sold to their whole lives. You've never met more suspicious or cynical people, and we've done that to them. And so, the question about presenting this to Catholic University students, I am delighted that many of the ones who still sort of identify as my family is Catholic and it lives somewhere still in my imagination, I'm delighted to invite them into a conversation about this. But I would say for the greater part, with people in that age group, the first thing is to get them to want to think about Catholicism at all. That's really the moment I think that we're at. That's the greatest challenge. I don't want to only give you a bad news picture. This is something else we're working on at the Bernardine Center. I was struck this summer, and I say this all the time, hundreds of thousands of young people, Catholic or not, took to the streets this summer. Whether they know it or not, they took to the streets because they believe in Catholic social teaching. They believe what we believe, even if they don't call it that. We need to make the effort to make that clearer and to make that more credible. And I think that's the first thing. And one of the ways we do that is by stepping away from the tumult of the political argument and dealing with them a little bit more honestly about the real world that they live in and the real world that they have concerns about, and pointing out to them that there's really a remarkable level of agreement between them and us. I think there's real opportunity there, but that's a long-term thing.
It's a long game.
Rama, I see a hand.
Oh, Rama. Go ahead.
Thank you. Susan, will this program be on our website so that we can send others to it to watch?
My plan for replaying or making the recording available is not solid, but I will, I'm definitely going to probably do both and, Rama. I'm going to put the video out there on our website, and I'm also going to organize another event where we can listen to Steve's presentation again and have more discussion. So it'll
Great,
probably be
thank you.
both.
Thank you.
Let me say a couple things too, if I could. I don't want to invite myself to anything, but if having me present for that discussion would be useful, we can do that. But the main thing I really want to say is, it's been asked about, have I talked to the bishops, or, what can we do to get this message out? You folks are how we do that. That's why I appear in front of audiences. And so if the video is shared, and I've also said to Susan, I'll be happy to share the text that I worked from so you can see the footnotes and that sort of stuff as well. Send it around. This really only works if we all become missionaries, if we all take seriously the task. Don't just lay it off on me. Don't just lay it off on a bishop. You need to be sending it to bishops, and you need to be sending it to friends and family and community members and everybody else. The gospel doesn't spread itself. We've got to do it.
That's so true. Thank you so much. Vicki, did you have a question? Vicki J? We can't hear you. You have to unmute, please.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to say that the gentleman has certainly given us so much to digest and so much to think about, and especially the comments made by Bishop Peprocki in Springfield. I think this has been a magnificent presentation, and like I say, gives us a lot to think about. Thank you very much.
I just want to say first, thank you, but I want to say too, I actually had a list of similar comments from other bishops. I limited myself to Peprocki because of proximity and time. We certainly could have spent more time with more bishops who have said equally codedly partisan things. And, you know, I always try to inject a note of charity into this part of the conversation. They have hard jobs, and they're not chosen for these jobs because they have a real background in American politics and political science and understanding this stuff. And of course, everybody wants to tell them they're wrong from one side or the other. So I have real sympathy for bishops in that sense. But I also think the more they hear the right things from us, hopefully there is some humility and charity there with them, that they can begin to see things a little differently. And I'll say last, you know, what's happening in the church now is awful, and we really have to wonder who's going to come back when all of this is over. There was a Belgian bishop last week who said that the process of secularization has been accelerated by 10 years by COVID-19. Will people come back? I think bishops are terrified about what that will mean. But I think maybe it also, from this perspective we're talking about here, it might be a holy terror. Maybe it's what makes them see what we've been doing isn't working. We need to do things differently. And that's why I say my eye is beyond Election Day. My eye is on what's the church of tomorrow going to look like? And that's why I'm thinking about young adults, and I'm thinking about this longer term perspective with this political message too.
Any other questions or comments? Daniel, I saw you had a comment in the about virtual nuns on the bus. Did you want to share that just briefly?
Well, we're in the planning stages right now. On September 30th, the nuns on a bus will be willing to do a Chicago-based type presentation that we, our Commonweal Communities Group, headquartered in but not actually affiliated with St. Gertrude Parish in Chicago, because we're doing political action work. So we're not a part of the parish, but we're headquartered there. It's going to be sort of co-hosting it or advertising it. You know, our exact role is not definite yet, but we are working with that network in order to have a Chicago-centered presentation on September 30th at about 6:30 in the evening. And we're looking for, you know, who wants to join us, how we could get the word out. It'll probably be a Zoom presentation, which will mean, I suppose there's 100 participant limit. But, you know, I don't know exactly how to tell you how to get the information of who to contact to disseminate the word to you all. I mean, I could give you my email address in the chat, and you could tell me who to contact in order to send links to or invitations to or something of that nature.
May I jump in on that just really quickly? Daniel, would you know my friend Herb Quindy?
I don't, unfortunately.
I was going to say Herb is, he works at CTU and he also is part of a Commonweal group organized, I think, through St. Gertrude, if I'm not wrong. But I was only offering his name because it would make making the connection easier. I can't promise we can do it. It would depend on the calendar. But if it becomes a question of the limit, I was saying to Susan before we began, we have 1,000 on our Zoom account that we can open things up to. And we hosted something this past Tuesday for the International Thomas Merton Society. If it's a matter of opening things up, we might be happy to help you with that.
Well, that sounds good. This person, Herb, you're referring to, there is a Commonweal community group headquartered, I think, at Chicago, University of Chicago, and he might be part of that group, no?
No, I don't think it's there. But that's okay. The main thing is get in touch with me. I'm easy to find on the CTU website. If that becomes something we could do for you, we're happy to do it.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll report that back to the steering committee.
And I do have to say, though, assuming our calendar is otherwise clear, which I can't swear to as I'm standing here on a Saturday morning.
Sure, I understand.
We have one more question from Edwina. She asks, do you think the young adults will have a different perspective of natural due to their life experience of technology? Will there be a new natural law theology?
New natural law theology?
Yeah,
that's that like the new natural lawyers like Griset and those other guys. Is that what we're talking about?
I don't know. Edwina's still here, but she's muted, I think.
Is this an Edwina that I know? It might be. So in terms of, hi there, Edwina. I'm unable to make a really good connection between the new natural lawyers and the experience of technology. I think for the most part, the folks who are trying to promote natural law in that way are responding to stuff that came through the radical orthodoxy movement in the 1990s and are in some other ways following John Paul's phenomenology. The experience of technology, if I'm going to make any connection about that at all, I'm going to say the experience of technology has mostly made young people unwilling readers of books of that length and complexity, the sort of thing that Griset and folks like that are writing. So I'm just unable to make that connection. I'm not entirely sure. Was there another hand or?
Mary asks, was Father Altman's main fault telling people how to vote? Is that the main thing that he's being cautioned against by his bishop, I think is the question.
Well, there was more than that in the video. The video also really amounted to an attack on James Martin and others. And, as I talked about earlier, slander is in fact intrinsically evil. There's a canonical right to your good reputation. So it wasn't only that, but certainly the implication that the church has a partisan position is, I think, both dangerous theologically, but don't underestimate the degree to which it's also dangerous legally. For the Diocese of La Crosse and the Roman Catholic Church more generally. When I wrote the book on Bernardine, I went to the American Catholic History Research Center in Washington, D.C. They have the archives of the U.S. bishops. And after I talked earlier about how Bernardine and the bishops went around and met with Carter and met with Ford, they unleashed the whirlwind by doing that. Because once they had met with the representatives of two-party, there's a memo in the archive from the General Council of the bishops letting them know, now you have to meet with all the candidates who want to meet with you. So it's important to remember that the church lives inside a legal establishment here in the United States that mostly is deferential to the church, but is less deferential to the church than it used to be. So I think the bishop is probably worried about a lot of things, and yeah, at the center of it is the implication of a partisan preference.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for your time and for your presentation. We're very grateful to you for giving us the time this morning and for allowing us to record. And we may take you up on your offer to come back and talk, lead a discussion if we, when we re-air this presentation. So thank you so much.
Well, I'm delighted to be with all of you. Thank you for paying so much attention and staying with it. And everybody stay healthy and safe.
Same to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.